Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the First Gen Healing Podcast. You are tuning into part two with Cara. Woo! She is going to be talking to us about specifically Saturn. So, we're going to talk about astrology, but specifically Saturn and the Saturn return. So I'm so excited because we get to tap into now your area of expertise. We heard about your story and now you get to tell us maybe I'm assuming it's something that you walk people through your services, right?
Oh, 100%. It always comes up.
Yeah. Do you find that that's when people are looking for guidance, let's say, when it comes to astrology?
Yeah, there's a couple of patterns, but I think Saturn is the one that sticks out most. And I see, like, having been an astrologer for a few years, I see the pattern of, in 2020 when people had their Saturn in Aquarius, and now it's people with their Saturn in Pisces. Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
definitely kind of brings people in to use the tool.
Yeah. So interesting. Okay. So, if you guys want like a little bit of a background on a natal chart, in part one, you did a really good job of like kind of setting the basics. So, they can go listen to that. But essentially, there's your natal chart and then there's like transit. So, it kind of moves based on the signs, right? Yeah. Okay. And so then in this episode, we want to talk specifically about Saturn and with the goal of helping you guys, one, understand what a Saturn return is, and then two, how you can use that in your healing journey, since we're all here healing and awakening. So I'll let you kind of take it away and then we'll go from there.
So it's definitely a tool for reflection. And so, how to use astrology as a timing technique for your healing journey. The Saturn return is what pushed me out of my comfort zone and, guided me to start my own business. And we start to find like we all have really similar stories when it comes to relating to our Saturn return. And so, astrology in general can be a powerful tool for personal growth, self discovery, and one way to use astrology as a timing technique is to look at your natal chart to identify these transits, such as the Saturn return, and knowing that it brings forth significant changes in our world, our culture, and our society. The structures that we are co creating, highlighting security, purpose, and life direction, decision making, following our own path, and cutting those karmic cords that are oppressing us.
Wow.
So I'll just note that Saturn is the furthest planet out visually. And so for a
Mm-hmm.
long time, Saturn represented time, mortality. It rules the winter months. And Saturn is the god of agriculture. So there's a lesson in boundaries and sustainability when working with Saturn. So it's like we got to
Mm.
put some respect on Saturn's name. It's not always an easy transit, but it wants us
Yeah.
to grow with integrity. So
Mm.
the Saturn return, oh, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just a quick question. So, in understanding astrology, every planet carries an energy. For example, you just explained the energy that Saturn and the lessons that it brings. And then Saturn return means like this where your Saturn was when you were born, it takes a cycle of is it 27 to 30 years to come back?
27 to 30, depending on retrograde. So that's kind of my next
Oh,
little insert here
okay.
is what is a Saturn return?
Oh, okay. There you
It's
go.
right. Yeah, I got you. I got you. Because, yeah, so many people are like, we've heard the term, but like, what does that actually mean? And
Yeah.
so we start to think about our birth chart. And then I think a lot of us forget that the planets keep moving, and those are the transits impacting us. And so the Saturn return occurs when Saturn completes its orbit around the sun and returns to the same position it was at the time of your birth. So it
Okay.
takes about 27 and a half years for it to maybe like enter the sign it was when you were born because
Mm-hmm.
Saturn stays in a sign for 3 years, depending on retrograde. And so that's why there's that reference of like 27 to 30. And
Okay.
so Saturn takes that long time to make a full circle around your birth chart. And, we can think about the sun and our birthday. Our birthdays are solar returns. So that means that our sun has gone through the full rotation of all 12 signs, 12 houses, and then comes back to where it was when we were born. And that's our birthday. Depending if
Mm-hmm.
you're in a different location, maybe it's a day or before or after, but that's our solar return, and we all celebrate our birthday. So then you can also think about the moon. The moon takes 28 days to go through those signs. And there's a lot of wisdom that comes with, we live on a 28-day cycle. And so the moon takes 28 days to make that full circle around the chart. And all the planets have their own time to do so. But for a long time, Saturn was the one that was the longest until we discovered Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So Saturn return, that's, daddy time, takes a long
Yes.
time to make that, journey. And also, when we're 25, for example, 26, Saturn hasn't made a full return. So there are things that we are still learning. And so it isn't till Saturn comes back to the same place it was when we were born. And then we can also think, well, I was a baby being born the first time Saturn was there. So maybe I wasn't really like grasping and learning a lot. So when we have Saturn return to the same place it was in the sky when we were born, that's an opportunity to, come into full alignment. Now Saturn has moved through all 12 houses. What have you learned? And so we generally see this at about 27 to 30. And there's also so many things within our culture that represent that. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the 27 Club for like famous
Mm-hmm.
musicians, but it
Yeah.
is a time that Saturn comes. And I always say Saturn comes in with a clipboard and, like, asks us, have
Ooh.
you been doing this? Have you been doing that? And, some of us, like, might not really have a relationship with Saturn at that point yet. So we're like, no, like this,
Yeah.
that, and the other. And so, yeah. And then, all the planets do have different energies. So, like Jupiter, for example, is abundance and wisdom and prosperity. So, that's like a very different energy when we talk about Jupiter. And that's why I say Saturn
Mm-hmm.
comes in with the clipboard. And it's like, and what
Mm.
boundaries? Because, it's the god of agriculture. So, it's like, what is your, system in watering and fertilizing? And so, some of us are learning how to answer those questions for the first time at this point through these
Yeah.
situations. And so, I also like to note that Saturn keeps moving, and so we have our second Saturn return at 56, at 57 to 60. And then, like, to get even deeper, is this references everyone at every age, because the way that Saturn makes its full circle, before it makes its full circle, it squares our natal Saturn when we're about 7, 8, 9. That's our first Saturn square. And we can all point to something that happened, when we had our first Saturn square as tension or obstacle, and something that kind of made us wake up and, come into alignment with the real world. And then we have the Saturn opposition when Saturn opposes your natal Saturn, and your natal Saturn is your birth Saturn. So when we're about 14 to 15, Saturn in the sky is opposing where it was when we were born, and that opposition is 180 degrees. And so 14 or 15
Mm.
is really tough. We're struggling with our own identity and being called one way and pushed one way. And so, some of my clients have kids who are 14 or 15, and I like to mention they're in their Saturn opposition. They're already
Wow.
feeling a lot with that. So maybe it's not a time to dogpile and to put, and then
Yeah.
Saturn keeps moving. And so when we're 20, for me, it was 21, but it can range from like 21 to 23. You have your last Saturn square before your Saturn return. And that square is a 90-degree angle from your natal Saturn. So you can see this with, like, if your Saturn is in a fixed sign, meaning the season doesn't change, like Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, every time Saturn is in a fixed sign, it'll make either a square or an opposition. So these are just patterns that I work with, sharing how to be aware of, like,
Of
when
where
I was,
it's at.
right, right. So if you look at your chart and you see, okay, Saturn was in Aquarius when I was born. Every time Saturn is in a fixed sign, you're going to be going through these markers of 7 years. But then it's when it comes to Aquarius again, that's your Saturn return. And
Yeah.
so right now, Saturn's in Pisces. So people who were born from 90, 94 to 97, that Saturn was in Pisces. So, based off the degree it was when you were born, are you having your exact Saturn return? Because, Saturn's in Pisces right now. But then knowing Pisces is a mutable sign, meaning the season changes. So, every time Saturn is in a mutable sign, like Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, um, and so, every time it's an immutable sign, it makes a challenging aspect. So
Yeah.
start to notice the modality of your Saturn. Is it cardinal, Capricorn? It initiates a season. So those cardinal signs would be Capricorn, Cancer, Libra, and Aries, of course, starts spring. So all of those cardinal signs start a season. And so, we can't deny astrology. Like, it is in the world around us. So just noticing those patterns and how they impact you can be really helpful to give yourself a timeline and to understand, oh, okay, things are going to feel a little heavy here. So what are my boundaries that help me and support me and allow me to
Yeah.
continue to do the work? So that
Yeah.
Saturn return is a time of significant change, growth, and it's often marked by challenges and obstacles that force us to confront our limitations and make important decisions about our life. So Saturn challenges us. That's why I say, like, we got to put some respect on Saturn's name. But it
Yeah.
just wants us to take accountability, to take responsibility, and to grow with integrity. So that's where we start to come into awareness, building our relationship with Saturn and understanding, those blockages and where they lie. And Saturn's just demanding that we deal with those situations that have been holding us back.
Yeah.
And so this pressure can feel like depression or burnout. And I think that's worth mentioning because we feel those things. And then when we look at the chart and we see this data, we realize, oh, we're not alone. We're all experiencing this in some way or another. Sometimes it's a bit more personal or more apparent, or it's in like a visible house where it's like, I rather have gone through this like in, the hidden realm. But so
Yeah.
just, understanding what house is your Saturn in, that can help a lot and kind of help remove shame to understand this is a time for growth here. And like just a quick example, but like my Saturn return was in my third house. And the third house is the house of the goddess, communication, siblings, and friends who feel like siblings. So during my Saturn return, I realized that some of my friends didn't share the same values as me and, weren't here for
Aligned.
the revolution.
Yeah.
And so I had to cut off some friendships because I realized these aren't my people. And it can feel isolating to have to go through a friendship breakup, but then to see, oh, this was right on time. They're not supposed to come with me on this next journey. They're not my true, friends. And so making space and having boundaries and cutting those people out actually supports us to make space for the people who are here for us and do truly care about us and
Yeah.
justice and equality. So it also kind of removes that shame and having to let go of some relationships. And maybe it's family, it looks differently for us all based off the different houses that, it's in. But bringing that perspective can really help like illuminate the season and understanding and, to create the reality that you're here for. So
Yeah.
Saturn teaches us to transform those old blockages and cultivate joy in perceiving through what feels insurmountable, but by creating boundaries that sustain us.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So much to learn from Daddy Saturn.
Truly. And the Saturn return as a timing technique in your healing journey can help you build a relationship with your Saturn. What sign is it in? What
Mm,
element is it in? What modality is it in? And I know, like in part one, you had asked me, how did, was it your intuition? Why did you feel like you couldn't conform? And we see
yeah.
that pattern with Saturn in a fixed sign, especially if that Saturn squares your sun, which I see in so many of my, clients. So it's
Mm,
like if you're a Scorpio sun and an Aquarius Saturn, there's tension and obstacle with following authority. And that Aquarius Saturn is unwilling to conform. And it's like, great, those are my people. Yeah.
yeah.
We
Yeah.
can't conform to something that was never made to support us to begin with.
Yeah.
So seeing that and celebrating that and empowering us to, what does sustain you so you can keep showing up for the revolution and liberation. But seeing
Yeah.
those patterns can be really helpful in setting your intentions for your Saturn return. Or, after our Saturn return, we have another Saturn square. And so
Mm,
some of my clients are in their Saturn square after their Saturn return. And maybe that's what really pushes them out of their comfort zone into this awakening, into this healing journey. And so that's at about 35. And so a lot of my clients are like, 35 is when I started my spiritual journey. So the Saturn return doesn't always, push us to make those changes, but Saturn in general will. And then looking
yeah.
at your chart and understanding who's Saturn next to. Is Saturn next to your moon? That's really, personal because your moon is your emotions and what you need daily. So if Saturn is on your moon, that's a huge transit to work for, whether your Saturn is there or not. But Saturn in the like if you have a Pisces moon and Saturn's in Pisces right now, Saturn is on your moon, restricting, how you nurture
Mm,
yourself. So just
yeah.
being aware of Saturn's transits, but the Saturn return is definitely one we could all probably write a book about.
No, really. I mean, it's crazy how much I feel like I've aligned to everything that's happening astrologically, like in my chart and then in my life. So one thing I don't know if you're gonna talk about, but how it's generational.
I don't know that I would use the word subgenerational because
Oh,
Saturn is in a
yes.
sign
Okay.
for 3 years. And so we can look back on these patterns that every time, Saturn has been in Aquarius. And so this is how I see it play out is that for a lot of us, if you were born, of course, this is forever, but if you were born with Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn is ruled by Capricorn. And so Capricorn is hardworking and disciplined. And we can look at the chart of the United States because there's charts for everything. There's not
Mm,
just birth charts, but there's a chart for this
mm-hmm.
meeting. We could pull a chart for
Mm,
anything that we do, and there's so much information there. And so there's charts for countries and everything. And so looking at, the quote unquote United States chart, when the United States was quote unquote founded, like heavy on the quotes, like what, yeah,
yeah.
but Pluto was in Capricorn. And so Pluto takes
Mm,
like 200 something years to make its full circle. And so Pluto's a bit of a generational planet,
yes. I think I
right?
mixed them up. Yeah, sorry, because I've found community in like I go to you mentioned mentorship too, and I go to a group that's all like Pluto and Scorpio people. And I think I mixed it up, so sorry, but yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. I'm same Pluto Scorpio generation, and that is the depth. We're not afraid to talk about the deep thing because let's not, surface talk. Let's talk about something that really matters here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the way that Saturn comes in, and we can look at it from the United States perspective. But so the United States was all like into like capitalism and into like that sham, and then now Pluto has finally made its way back to Capricorn. And so now that's our generation is realizing capitalism isn't going to save us. This was all kind of, a lie. And so now that Pluto's going into Aquarius, that's when we start to see humanitarianism, like reimagining what is possible and not conforming to those outdated limiting beliefs. And so, by
Yeah.
the same logic, talking about Saturn, when Saturn is in Capricorn, it rules, it is able to function in a traditional realm. Now, not forever, but let's say it's able to, get into some rooms, have some conversations. But then when we take Saturn into Aquarius, Aquarius is fixed. And, where's the hat of humanitarianism? So Saturn in Aquarius is so smart because it's ruled by Aquarius in ancient astrology. And so ancient astrology just uses the rulers up to Saturn. So Saturn rules Capricorn and
Mm.
Aquarius. And so Aquarius Saturns understand systems and they're so smart that like they can't be lied to. So there's kind of that sub generation of millennials with Saturn and Aquarius. And they're saying, no, the system's broken.
Yeah.
You can't lie to us and tell us that this
Yeah.
works. Like, we're smart enough to see the data to create our own systems and resources. And we are not going to believe you that this works. It doesn't work. We see that. And so, that having that like Saturn and Aquarius is like, we can't be lied to. And then so
Yeah.
I think we all play such a heavy role in like, the people with Saturn and Capricorn, they might have shown up and, to those traditional beliefs and then realized, oh, this isn't the way. And then the people in Aquarius with Saturn in Aquarius were like, I couldn't even show up if I wanted to. Like, I'm so outspoken in those rooms. Like, and then you take into the next generation that has Saturn in Pisces. And Saturn or Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, which is expansion and abundance and spirituality. And so it just kind of like knows no form. That's Pisces in the depth. And then you take a Saturn in Pisces, and that's going to be, a lesson to learn. And like, yes, there is so much magic in how we express ourselves, but in order to do so, we're going to have boundaries to protect us. And
Yeah.
so let us, millennials with, or really anyone with Saturn in Capricorn and Saturn in Aquarius, let us show you what boundaries look like. Let us show you what using the systems to support each other looks like podcasts, just creating these communities, I think it's bigger than us because we have to help the next people going through their Saturn return. And so if your Saturn is in Pisces, finding those resources and those tools that the, Aquarius Saturns and Capricorn Saturns started to kind of form and create or share could be really helpful. And then I think, what's next? If you're born in 96, that's when Saturn goes into Aries. So, next, those people will have their Saturn returns. So, Saturn functions for us all differently based off what sign it's in and based
Yeah.
off our chart and what house it's in. So, that's how I see it kind of show up in like a sub generational place.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, it's so, so interesting. And I love that you mentioned structure because I think that, for example, well, for one, I'm a Saturn in Aquarius, so I definitely understand. And I embodied the following structures for a very long time, right? And so let's say up until my Saturn return, I was like, give me the roadmap for the American dream. I'm following it, and I'm going to go by the book. And so I was like in HR, which was all about structure and like kind of suppressing like the creatives. And there's kind of like this very structured, no wiggle room space. However, one way that maybe I can ground these terms for those of you guys that are listening, hopefully it helps a little bit. I worked in corporate offices for a very long time, and then I became a consultant, an HR consultant, which meant that I got to work with small businesses. Okay. And so it was like mom and pop shops, all kinds of them. It could be like construction or veterinarians, just all kinds of small businesses. And when I would walk in, they would be like, "Oh, no, we don't have a handbook here. We're like a family, you know. We don't like kind of telling me like we don't need or want those rules, you know, and we don't need that structure." And I'm like, "Okay, and how do you track when someone calls out like, "Oh, well, I have like the text, but I don't really like write it down." Okay, and how do you let go of someone? "Oh, yeah, I have a hard time doing that." So kind of like digging in and doing this like assessment. And what I would tell them and what I learned is like that all sounds really good to like do away with the structure that maybe you dislike in structured spaces. But when I would dig into these dynamics, they'd be like, so many secrets, so many resentments, so messy, honestly. It was like very layered and messy and cluttery. And so it was kind of like this process of convincing or showing or proving to business owners that structure sets you free as well. Some of it. You don't have to like structure where there's no wiggle room, but some of it helps you, and creating some sort of process or flow does help things run a little bit smoother. When they would hire me, they were looking for someone to do the dirty work, let's say, right? Because they couldn't handle how messy it got. But thankfully I wasn't hired for that. I was hired to show them how to set processes and procedures in place. So let me know if that makes sense is like on your end and if that ties what we've been talking about together.
100%. And you can even think about it's Aquarius wants us to be able to take the next evolutionary step. And so we do that through creating systems and structures that support us. And so whether it's through HR, whether it's through data, whether it's through tech, whether it's through us understanding these systems and sharing them, that is our skill and our gift and what we can offer to others who might not have those placements. And so it's funny that
Yeah.
you see it through astrology, you see it through HR, but with my Saturn in Aquarius, I see it in astrology. Like astrology is a system. It is data, it is mathematics, it is like, input these variables here, this is, and for thousands of years, we can track this. Like the first birth chart that we have reference of, now it could have gone before, but that we have reference of was 410 BCE. And so it also there's lies in like the Babylonian times that there's their oral tradition. So I look at astrology as data, and I can look back on all of these cycles, and it's like you can't deny it. Like here's thousands of years of proof. So no matter where we find the data, data is our strong suit. And then I even see like TikTok being something that we can put in the palm of our hand that allows us to take the next evolutionary step and to spread our message and to create these resources at a faster rate because
Yeah.
that's how that functions there for us. I could
Yeah.
go on forever, like not only Saturn, but like Neptune and Uranus. You kind of start to see that Gen Z has Neptune and Uranus in Aquarius. So there's all these kind of, subgenerational placements of Aquarius really highlighting what's next and what's possible. And then you take into account the current transits, and Pluto just entered Aquarius. And Pluto is transformation, albeit transformation through a feeling of lack. And so when Pluto first enters, we feel like, we're in a lack. And even having this conversation, like Aquarius is the radio waves, the podcasting waves. And so I'm a Sagittarius rising. My Saturn in Aquarius is in my third house. And so whenever I had my Saturn return, I learned boundaries to sustain me. And now that Pluto has entered Aquarius, Pluto's using all of those lessons that we've learned and turning it into something bigger that, creates more of a connection, honoring humanitarianism. So even having this conversation with you on a podcast, like it's taking my Saturn return, and now that Pluto is here, it's transforming all that work that I've done.
Yeah, oh my gosh. I want to mention that too. So like my Pluto is in Scorpio in my 10th house, which is my career. So the fact like just like you're saying, the fact we're having this conversation is proof of astrology because yeah, I had my Saturn return, which was in my first house, and it's like individuating and all of that good stuff. And it's funny because I booked my astrology reading during, like, after my uncle passed. I kind of like, I would tune in, but I never scheduled one. And then I was like, I need help. I'm going through too much. And I had it, and she's like, you've come at the right time. You are in your Saturn return.
Every
um,
time.
yeah, astrology is so, so cool. But I do want to be mindful of your time because I know you've given us a lot. So maybe, is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap up part two? Although, yeah, I love this information. So thank
I
you so,
know,
so
right? I know I
much.
could go on forever. Thank you. Like I don't, I'm time isn't even real, you know? So
Yeah.
it's only through astrology do I find time. But I think a little bit of like helpful information when it comes to having your Saturn return is understanding that, during your Saturn return, it's important to stay grounded and to focus on your intentions. And, sometimes that looks like going within, like it looks differently for us all, right? And then, like,
Mm-hmm.
is your moon involved? Is your sun involved? There's so much nuance with understanding your own Saturn return. And it can be a difficult time as you may feel like you're being tested or challenged in ways that are unfamiliar and uncomfortable. However, by staying true to yourself and staying committed to your path, you can emerge from your Saturn return feeling stronger and wiser and more resilient. And I like to say that, like, after your Saturn return, you learn something that no one can take away from you anymore. So,
Yeah.
in addition to your Saturn return, there's so many transits that can be useful during your healing journey. And so just understanding, there's so much that we're looking at and something worth noting. Like I'll definitely like do a reading for you and we can like get into the deep of
Ah.
it. But something that comes up a lot for me, understanding timing, are the eclipses. And so
Mm.
understanding that, yes, working with Saturn is a tool, but also being mindful of like where the eclipses are happening can also be really helpful to my clients because just like I see the pattern of Saturn returns, I see the pattern of people coming to get a reading whenever their moon or their sun or their rising sign is being eclipsed. And so the eclipses stay in a sign for a year and a half. They're called the nodes. And so right now, for example, the nodes are in Libra and Aries. So if you look at your sun, moon, rising, and so many of my clients, like I feel like all I'm talking to are Libra people, whether it's Libra, sun, moon,
Oh.
rising, but they're coming out. Like yesterday, I had 3 readings with Libra moons, and some of them were Libra,
Wow.
sun, and moons. And so just know that like we're in a season, until March 2025, there's an eclipse in Libra and the nodes are here until late October. So just being mindful of all these different aspects and nuances within your chart and understanding, oh, this is a season where my sun or my moon is being eclipsed, and that can feel really draining, but ultimately it's an opportunity to like make that drain work for you and release and surrender and lighten your load on your karmic path. And what's funny is I always mention that like when I was going through those transits, I was on drain talk. And I didn't even know that was a thing. So someone please let me know if you two are on drain talk. But I would see like natural drains that were clogged and flooding, and then people would go in with some type of tool to create, clear block, removing the blockages for the natural drains. And I'm just like, astrology is everywhere. Like, so
What?
just being, yeah. And so
Wait, do you mean
understanding,
like your feed was full of people like
yes,
oh my
yes,
God, wow.
yes. Like I didn't even know that was a thing. Why are there so many TikToks about it? But yes, about natural drains being clogged, being flooded, and then, clearing those blockages and allowing flow and release.
Wow.
And that's exactly what my clients were dealing with. Like every time they would come to me and, say they have these Libra moons, and I'm like, okay, well, October 14th was a first eclipse. We have another eclipse coming up March 25th. And so being mindful that this is a season that can feel so draining. So don't try to hold yourself to another standard. don't think, but I have to produce all of this now. It's actually a time to release and rest and surrender. And ultimately, that's where you find alignment. So, working with all these timing techniques with your birth chart and kind of planning what this year looks like for you, what, the journey looks like, whatever timeline you're working on can just be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for pointing that out too, like helpful aspects, because it can get overwhelming, right? When you hear about new moons and then full moons and then this is happening, all of the things. So, thank you for like highlighting. Here are some things that you can pay attention to or maybe start like deciphering and then understanding from there. So, yeah, super cool. I hope those of you guys listening found this helpful. I'm sure you did. There was so much, so many gems there. And I love also that you talked about different generations. It doesn't matter what age we are, like we are all going through something that can be reflected in our chart. So please guys make sure that you go support Cara in her social media and you check out her services. And any last words before we close out?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am always here for questions, comments, reflections. So I just love talking astrology. So feel free to come to me with any questions, and I'm here for you.
Awesome. Yay. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.